Hey, I'm Mike Meiers, and this is the Songwriting for Guitar podcast, which is geared to support songwriters and producers to gain confidence and turn pro. I bring on industry experts to help you improve and monetize your skills, engage better in the writing process, and build healthy habits to create a sustainable career that you love. Caffeinated, inspirational, conversational. Hey friends, Mike Meiers here with the Songwriting for Guitar podcast, episode number 97, Live Gigs to Full-Time Production. Did you know that you might be missing out on amazing songs, amazing melodies that are currently in your brain right at this very moment as I'm saying this sentence, that are going unused? They're locked. They're in a secret compartment, a secret door in your mind. And I'll tell you what's going to unlock it. It's your guitar. But the problem is you're not using your guitar to its fullest potential. And that's why I wrote The Songwriting Guitarist Transformation in Just 15 Minutes a Day. This book walks you through a methodology that I've developed in almost a decade of teaching songwriters, guiding them through a process that I use myself, that I've written hundreds upon hundreds of songs that have gone into production, that have landed into television shows that artists have released. I'm giving you that formula right now. All you got to do is go to songwritingguitaristbook.com to get your copy. And guess what? I want to give you a free copy, a free freaking copy of this book. All you got to do is just pay the shipping and handling. That's right. I have your copy right here. I just need to know where to send it. So go to songwritingguitaristbook.com to get your free copy. Claim it right now and get those songs that are in your head out of there and get them into the world. Now, in this episode, I'm talking with Steph Trivison, and I've never met Steph. We've followed each other mutually on Instagram, but what I love about having a podcast like this, throughout the discussion and the conversation, you're going to see we feel like we've known each other for quite a while because it was a supernatural conversation, but I really wanted to dive into her transformation from live gigging to full-time production and crushing it in sync. I mean, when I'm talking about crushing it in sync, she's had McDonald's commercials, Care Bear. I was so excited to talk about that. She's had songs on Amazon Prime, the Grammy Awards, the Golden Globes, ESPN, BBC. I could keep on going on and on the amount of work that she has done for TV and film. But what I love is her commitment to the process and allowing it to evolve, knowing when to change. We talk about some of the characteristics that she feels that kind of kept her on this path, that didn't allow her to just drop off and give up, but make those changes. Those things I talk about again and again, pivoting, we're going to get into that. So believe me, if you are someone who wants to do this full time, that you want to hear a story of someone that was in your shoes, that made that change over time, that will give you some really killer advice. And also too, you'll just have an amazing conversation. This episode you've got to listen to. So I'm going to dive into it right now. Episode number 97, Live Gigs to Full-Time Production. Steph, I feel like we've been in the same spaces, the same online spaces where it's like, I kind of knew you, but I've never met you or had a conversation. And so this is it. This is the first one.
Yeah, I'm stoked. That's the weird thing about the internet is you can kind of tangentially know other people in the same space where, 15 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. It's cool. I mean, it's a great democratizing of music, I think. But
good wordage choices right there. That was swinging out of the gate with a thesaurus and boom, 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 boom. But it's kind of crazy to think 15 years ago, you knew people based on just proximity of where you were in your day-to-day space. But with the expansion of when you're doing online marketing and you're posting content and you're doing things that have particular hashtags and you're in a certain industry, that opens you up to a whole other space of people that but you've never met. And it's crazy. Right. Some of the people that I talk to the most, I haven't met physically at all yet, which is to me, I'm wow, it's an amazing kind of age that we live in.
Yeah. I really appreciate it because now living in what is definitely not a music town. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't want to like disparage Chapel Hill, North Carolina, but like, it's not Nashville, it's not LA,
No.
it's not New York, it's not Chicago. Like to develop a community
Mm-hmm.
is tough. And like growing up in Cleveland, that came more naturally because just year after year you meet more and more people in the scene and you
Mm-hmm.
kind of develop it that way. But I moved here a couple of years ago and I knew no one. So it's definitely like having access to folks on the internet and having Zoom calls with people. This has been my way of like building the network for sure.
Well, it's funny because you say, yeah, I live now in you were like, I don't live in a music city. I lived in Pittsburgh, which was not far from Cleveland, but it wasn't a music city per se. And I
Right.
think it's like when I say that, it's like, yeah, there's good music, but it's not necessarily on the top list of like, this is the music place to be. We just had a lot of bridges, and not all of the bridges were actually like, would you want to drive on?
Dangerous roads,
And
dangerous
it's
bridges.
crazy to think that you were in Cleveland.
Yeah.
Because someone mutually, it was like, I was like, oh, my friend Maddie, and it's just like, who's a coach for us, and like her and I have written a ton now that she, I live in Nashville and she lives in Nashville. It's like, it's crazy to actually now see a person. It's probably the one person I actually do see. So for you growing up, was it always music?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Simple answer, yes. My dad is a musician, still active. He made the great snowbird trip from Ohio down to Florida a couple years ago, and so he plays down there in like a cover duo,
Mm-hmm.
But he played for many years in cover bands in Ohio, doing like classic rock, and that was his lane. But his dad, my grandpa, was a jazz guitarist. And so music was always around, and I was going to gigs really young. I mean, my first time on a stage was at a gig that my dad and my grandpa's band had. So they played at a restaurant, which was like safe enough for me to go to,
Yeah.
at 12 or 13. And I jumped on the stage and we played Help by the Beatles. And that was the first time I ever, did anything on a stage. So like it was definitely part of the DNA. It was always around. And I really wanted to emulate my
Yeah.
dad. He had this red Strat. And so I was like obsessed with this guitar. And I couldn't even, I could barely pronounce, I certainly couldn't pronounce Stratocaster, but, I could barely
Yeah.
get Strat out. And my parents were like, okay, we got to figure this out. And for Christmas one year, they got me this red, like plastic guitar that looked kind of like a Strat and it came with a little microphone and stuff. So yeah, I got bit by the bug really early. And I wanted to play drums actually. I watched I already mentioned the Beatles, but I watched the movie Help and Ringo is like the star of
Yeah.
that movie. I don't know if you've seen it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, "Oh, I got to be a drummer." So that was actually the very first real instrument I got was a drum set.
Starting out with drums, I feel, is like really good.
Yeah.
It is, because not only is it badass because it's really cool. Actually, guitar is also bad, but like drums, that's another level. But then, like, fast forward now, it's depending on how much you get into it. I'm like, from a production standpoint, it's actually really good to understand the drum kit
I mean,
and the
it's
pieces of the
yeah.
drum kit and all of that later on.
Right. And I never got like super, super good, but I can play even today well enough that like for me when I'm producing, because totally in the box at this point.
Me
Um,
too.
but when I'm programming
Yeah.
drums, what? I missed it.
No, I
Sorry.
was like, I'm the same. Like, I'm exactly the
Are
same.
you
I'm all
okay?
in the box. I'm using MIDI drums. I'm throwing it in. I'm programming, and then I'm bouncing, and I'm adding samples and sounds. But like, that has to be helpful to think of like, oh, I would play that. This is how it would go. I would do a fill here.
Exactly. Yeah, and I will literally sort of air drum or like tap on my desk to understand how do I want the part to sound? Where do I want the
Yeah.
fills? It makes, I mean, knowing the basics of as many instruments as you possibly can understand. Like
Mhm.
to me, that is, if you want to be a producer, you need to understand as many instruments as you can.
So when you were, learning drums, were you also too like just obsessed with listening to music? Because I feel like I was at a whole, like, I would listen to albums, from front to back. I would obsess over like album covers and like liner notes and listen for like little tiny sounds and like nuances, not thinking I want to produce, but just obsessed with like what is the thing that's happening in these
Right.
songs.
Right, yeah, and we had a lot of the stuff around the house too, so, like, if I heard an instrument, I was like, "Oh, I think that might be a flute." I could go find a flute, I could
Oh,
go
that's
find a
cool.
recorder, I could find whatever, and sort of, like, make the connection between what I was hearing professionally that someone else had recorded and what we own. And my dad had he had one of those, like, Tascam 4-track
Yeah, yeah.
recorders. So that was like right away. I was like, I want to record music. That was something at like 6 years old. I'm trying to figure out how to do this.
Yeah.
So it was just like so beneficial to have all of this stuff at my fingertips at such a young age. But yeah, I mean, like that, I mentioned the Beatles a couple times now, but that was what I was obsessed with growing up. They had this like greatest hits cassette kind of package where there was like the red cassette and the blue
Blue
cassette,
cassette,
and they
yeah, and they're
represented.
overlooking like, and it's just like
Yeah,
different eras of the Beatles. Yeah, I know which one you're talking
exactly, and
about.
I just wore that out. I mean, like, that was everything, but at the same time, I was listening to, like, I'm a late '80s kid, so, I was listening to, like, Jagged Little Pill and Boys to Men 2, and, like, I was still getting, like, a modern, um an influx of, like, modern music, but still really obsessed with the Beatles, the Beach Boys, Queen, like,
Hmm.
that was what was on in the house.
What's interesting about like the Beatles and the Beach Boys, like for me, it was the same thing. Like the Beatles, the White Album, I obsessed over religiously because it was like there's also weird songs on there. There's also like, and then just the album artwork and being like, wow, this is, but and then at the same time consuming things like Green Day and then consuming things like Nirvana and a little bit of Pearl and all these different like, early 90s and then like
Right.
it just your amalgamation, I guess, of like all those things together. When did you then make the jump to, if you're doing this, you're writing songs and experimenting, when do you start just like playing your own stuff and going
Yeah.
out and starting to do like that band gigging kind of like next step?
Right. Well, I had a series of really terrible bands in
Yeah.
high school, like we all
Hmm.
do. I joined like it wasn't an orchestra, but like the band, sort of wind ensemble in our school, and really, really loved that. And I was playing guitar on the side. And by the time I got to high school, there were more and more kids who had experience playing drums and playing bass and singing and whatever. And so I started to find those kids.
Hmm.
And yeah, we started writing originals. I was probably maybe 15 or so. Um, and just like the most atrocious lyrical content, like songs about Nintendo,
Yeah.
like whatever, you're 15. Like, what are you writing about, really?
I mean, what
Um,
problems can you write when you're 50? It's just like, you try to like write as much as you can, but they're like, oh yeah, okay. Those are my
yeah,
problems.
it's just, it's definitely like
Yeah.
writing. But um, yeah, but then that first band I was in that was writing these songs, we got a gig at this place in Cleveland called The Pit.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
it was like this venue was on the 2nd or 3rd floor of a warehouse building. There's no elevator, so you gotta, like, lug all your stuff up the stairs, um, this was like an all-girl pop band,
Mhm.
and or, like, pop punk band, really, and, so we get there, and we have these, like, kinda punk songs, but we're also doing covers of, like, "Build Me Up, Buttercup," and all of the other bands on the bill are, like, screaming and have these, like, heavy metal songs,
Yeah.
and we're just, like, these teenage girls singing Ace of Base covers, like, it just was really wacky, but a great starting point, like, everybody needs to go through those experiences, I think. So it started for me in my, yeah, early teenage years and just really kept going from there. I don't think I ever slowed down from there.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I remember I think every town has a venue where it's like, yeah, there's no staircase. There's just one long staircase or like no elevator. It's just this long staircase. And
Right,
everybody, it's like, of course, your bassist got like the Ampeg 8x10. And so you have to lug it up. You decided we need
right.
road cases. And so now you're just like, oh, shit, this is a terrible idea. And
Yeah.
in Pittsburgh, what was it? The Smiling Moose? Terrible staircase. Awful, awful place. In the sense of
I
just
think I've been there.
the duration of like from here to there. Don't hold on to the railing because the railing isn't secure. It's just more
Right.
or less the support. yeah, it's just crazy to think that every place has something like that. But here you are still doing it. And, I always think about, I don't know, do you ever think about two people that had the same like drive and like they were ready and then, I don't know, then just kind of fizzled out and they just kind of
Oh,
stopped?
I would say that's the majority of people,
Yeah.
Like, I definitely came up so, the bands that I was in my 20s that had, like, a little bit of local success,
Hmm.
we kind of came up in an era of this really amazing, supportive community,
Yeah.
and I look back now and I think, like, how many of us are still doing something in music? And it's not many of us. There's, like, maybe I could count on one hand how many folks from that sort of
Yeah.
era of the Cleveland music scene are still out and making music. So, you definitely but that's, like to me, that's a prerequisite in success for anything, not just music,
Yeah.
is having the ambition, the drive, the commitment. Like, if you don't have that, I mean, that's step 1. If you don't have that, your chances of succeeding whatever you're trying to do will be much lower, I think.
I really like that because I kind of feel the same way where it was like, yeah, it's not going to be perfect. I remember, dating people and and she would be like, when are your band going to make it? I'm like, I don't think you know how music works. There's not really
Yeah.
like a mountaintop. It's like, this is basically, it's going to be another thing, another thing, another thing. Now, I'm curious, the jump from someone doing this too, from band to licensing, because for me, I had no idea about this world. It was like, what? What's this?
Right.
How'd you do this?
Well, I also had no clue
Yeah,
at all. I wrote this song. So I was in a band called These Knees for a little bit, and I wrote this song.
that's amazing. These knees.
I saw it on your face. I've had a lot of knee issues over the years, and I was really I was like, it was like a solo project, but I wanted a name for it. I'm like, what the heck am I going to call this thing? And one day can I like swear on
Yeah,
this?
you can fucking swear. That's fine.
Yeah, one day I was like, "Oh, these fucking knees," because I had some pain or something, right?
Yeah.
And I was right in the midst of trying to figure out the name, so I was like, "Okay, it's gonna be these knees," and then I just called it a day. But it was a mistake because I will tell you, like, dozens and dozens of times that people thought I was saying bee's knees, like, "Oh, that's the bee's knees." So, yeah, people never heard it right. It was a whole thing. But
It's amazing.
uh, yeah, bad band names aside, I wrote a song in that band called Pacifica, and it had this it was like a surf rock kind of thing, or I'd say like surf indie
Yeah.
vibe, but it had this hook right off the top that was just woes, but
Yeah.
it was a catchy woe section, and I was approached by someone connected to Jukebox the Ghost. Do you remember that band?
I do remember that. Yeah.
I don't remember if it was like a manager or how they were related, but they kind of like pitched themselves as being connected to that band. And they were like, hey, that song Pacifica, like that could be a Target commercial. Have you ever thought about writing songs for commercials? And I had no idea, like
Yeah.
where do you even start with that, right? And so we had a meeting and it didn't go anywhere. I don't think they knew how to do it either. They just like saw maybe potential. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna like store that little nugget for when I need it. And several years went by. And then a friend of mine she's a big sports fan, but she watches like the women's national soccer team and like the WNBA, a lot of women's sports. And she's like, Steph, you were an athlete, you're a musician. I watch these games and they have all of these hype songs that men are singing. There should be a woman singing the
Yeah.
song for these games. And I was like, all right, let me try something. And so I came up with a song called Outlaw and I pitched it to the Professional Fast Pitch League and they used it that year. And that was like really my first actual
Can we
placement
appreciate
was
all that action just all within that couple of sentences? So your
yeah,
friend says, hey, you know, it's just, here's all this women's sports and it's all these dudes that are just being like, yeah, and then you're just like, wait a minute. Okay, I'm going to take this and I'm going to do something. And you
right.
did it. And not only that, but then you sought out an opportunity. You went and you're like, hey, I've got this.
Right.
So many people have these opportunities where people are like, you should do this. And they go, yeah, I'll think about it. That's my favorite. I'll think about it. Where it's like, I'll look into it. Look into what? They've told you exactly what needs to happen.
Right.
And you did that all within boom, boom, boom. That to me is
Yep.
crazy.
Well, I always felt like, I'm never, ever, ever the most talented person in any room or session or
Mhm.
anything. Like I feel a lot of imposter syndrome, but I am more dedicated and, committed and willing to put in work and willing to try things and also like willing to make an ass of myself. I've got a lot of embarrassing stuff out there from my early years of trying to figure it out. And I think that has been kind of like the difference maker for me is finding a way, like
Yeah.
just figuring out how to do it. And that's where I see a lot of folks that, yeah, they might want the placement, they want the like glory of some of the stuff that they're seeing you do, but they're not willing to put in the work for it. And I would say that's kind of like one of the biggest downfalls I see with folks is like just put in the effort. People want shortcuts. There aren't a lot of shortcuts.
There's
You just
not.
got to do the work.
There's zero. It's basically the show. And I feel the same way. It's like, I'm not the craziest guitar player. I'm not the best producer. I'll show up. I'll be nice. I'll be polite. I'll do the work. I'm not afraid to fuck up. I'm not afraid to make a mistake because probably something good's going to come from that mistake. I may
Right.
write 10 songs that go nowhere, but I've got 10 songs that I've gained new information that'll help the next 10 songs probably be way better.
Right.
And I'm okay with being uncomfortable. Like, it's just like, yeah, I'll be uncomfortable for a while. Then there's a period of not being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's just,
But all the good stuff,
yeah,
I feel like all the good stuff comes from the discomfort. Like that's where you learn and grow and whatever is like you've got to get uncomfortable. I think that's part of it.
complacency doesn't really build like really next level things. And I think what you're describing for me too, the series is you never got to a point where it was like, I'll let it just, this is good. And I'll just let this be, this is it.
Right.
But it's like, cool. There's another thing. Because music or in licensing too is just this never ending. It just keeps going. There's not going to be a
Right.
point where it's like, mountaintop and it's like, I've reached the top of the plate. No, it's just like, you got to keep on going to the next one.
Right.
But
it's a funny misconception that people have that like there's like some win that's ever going to be enough, that's going to be like, okay, I'm good now, like that's never the case. And I mean, I suppose maybe for some people they feel that way. For me, I am always, always, always thinking like, oh, it was really awesome that I just was hired to do the new Care Bears theme song.
which I wanted to talk about because I think that's fucking awesome. Now, it's like, how did that happen?
we can cover that.
Yeah, I want to know, how did that happen?
Yeah, well, so Care Bears, the company that owns the Care Bears is called Cloud Co, and they are owned by American Greetings, and both of those are based in Cleveland. And so they have, and like kudos to them, but they have really leaned into like local talent anytime that they've needed music or illustration. And so it's funny because over the years, I've watched several of my friends do different voices for the Care Bears. And I thought, oh, maybe one day, because, there's only so many of us that could do like kind of a cutesy thing, right? And I was like, maybe one day I'll get it. But yeah, it was super happenstance. They were coming out with a new bear called Dare to Care. And Dare to Care has like a little bit of a mohawk and sort of like a blend of colors. And they wanted it to be a certain kind of vibe. And the producer who was hired for it thought of me to be the vocalist. So I did the vocals, and then first they wanted 15 seconds, and then they wanted 30 because they liked it so much, and then they wanted a minute, and so the song kept growing, and eventually we built out a full song for them. And as a result of that, I actually produced the song as well. There's a section of the song that we had to add while the original producer was on vacation. So I filled in, figured out that section, produced it, wrote some lyrics. And yeah, and then like a few months later, it was an illustrated music video essentially for this release of this new Care Bear.
So, but again, it's like what you described is a moment, and you can't, you just need to just jump into it. There's no kind of like, oh, this is the book and the textbook that will prepare you for when and then you have to build out another half of the song and jump in and do that. That is a whole series of just like, these are opportunities, and you just need to live into it, and you just do the work, but it's fucking Care Bears. And I'm like, that's so amazing. And I love that they looked locally too, for like,
Right.
that's where they started, because like you described kind of like, oh, this is why. And it's like, whoa, I didn't know that. And that's amazing. Now,
Yeah, so now there's like this Cleveland supergroup of former Care Bear singers who I think we should get together
I
and
was
put
going
a
to say,
show.
is there like, it's almost like a gang that you get together every like,
Yeah.
couple of months, and you just like Care Bears, and you all have jackets too, that are leather jackets
Yeah, ooh,
with the Care Bear on the back.
I love that idea.
Now, to me, one thing writing, but another thing producing, because it's like two different hats that you have to wear. Well, you're writing, producing, and you're top line. And so to me, there's like three hats. How do you view your role kind of like in that creation of concept, building the structure in the ground, and the feeling, the vibe, and on top of that, supplying the vocal, the thing that we're always like listening for, and parts that are being used? Like, how do you navigate those waters?
Well, I think for me, it started with like I've always viewed songwriting as a thing that I loved from the time I was, like I said, probably in my early teens was when I started actually. I mean, I wrote some songs when I was like 6 or 7, but you can imagine what those sounded like.
Fucking awesome, because maybe they were. It's just like
They were maybe a little catchy. But yeah, so I always saw songwriting as like in my head, I would hear all the stuff. I would hear the drums, I would hear the guitar, because I was like sort of capable of playing all the things. That's how I put the songs together in my head. And then I would, in bands, I would say like, hey, bass player, can you try this? Hey, drummer, can you do something a little bit more like this? So I felt like I was always kind of producing in a way when I was songwriting. And then I started to actually need to do it. I wanted to demo the songs that I was hearing so that I could kind of serve up parts. And so for me, it feels like they're all kind of part of the same process. Like when I do songwriting now, I'm sitting in front of a computer almost, I would say 95% of the time. Like that's how I start. And I've got all the stuff I've got my guitars, I've got my keyboard, I have everything I need surrounding me. But I kind of start here. And I think as it relates to sync, or like learning how to produce for sync, it's not that different. Ultimately, you're just trying to create the best song that you can create. And if it's a crappy song, or if it sounds too much like sync, they're going to sniff that out and say like, no, that's not something we want. So I think you have
This
to
is going to
just
be a
make
social
the
media
best
clip right
song.
here, just this moment, because I'm just like, this needs to be one on loop again, because this is, again, refreshing to hear, because I feel like I say it a lot, people say, but having you just be like, oh yeah, it can't be a sync song. It has to be like a
Yeah.
really good song. I'm like, yeah.
Right. It just like you can feel when it's inauthentic. And I'm not saying like I certainly write lyrics from perspectives other than my own life all the time, but it still needs to come from a place of authenticity, and it needs to sound real, like you're a real artist. And you are a real artist, but like you're like building this sort of puzzle of this song to fit a specific end use. So I to me, I don't think of them as like, oh, I'm writing a song or I'm writing a song for sync. They're one and the same. I'm just trying to do, and I'll say with like anything that I do in my life, I'm just trying to do the best that I possibly can. So that's what I strive for. Sometimes I don't do so well. Sometimes I hit a home run. So um, it's a little bit of both. But then, yeah, I always try to come with the lens of um, like what's the reference, I guess, like what am I trying to accomplish with this song? Where do I think it will land? and then writing with that in mind, both lyrics, like vocal delivery, trying to figure out the best ways, the best chance I have to get placed is to like think about those things as I'm writing.
I
So
love that.
yeah,
Especially you're starting to compose it, but you're thinking about the bigger picture. What am I pointing
yeah,
this to? What do I
hmm
have to be like, this is what I'm aiming for. This is what I hope for it to sound like, as opposed to being like, I'll let inspiration take the wheel and I'll figure out what it's going to get. And then meanwhile, that's where you get like the Frankenstein kind of like weird, like,
yeah,
this sounds like Nickelback, Miley Cyrus, a little bit of the Bee Gees, and Teletubbies. Like, it's
yeah.
like,
Not good.
it's
Not good.
it's just all over. But it's just, but you have to, it still has to point somewhere. But again, authenticity. I'm like, yep, because they
hmm
can sniff out something that's totally fake.
And I think that's where, like you mentioned, just being a lover of music at a young age, I think that's where like having a really wide and also deep appreciation for music goes a long way. Because if someone comes to you with a brief and they want a hip hop song, well, guess what? Like I've been in rock bands my whole life, but I know and appreciate hip hop from, certain
Mm-hmm.
artists that I've liked over the years. So that's the angle that I come from, is trying to figure out like, okay, if I wanted to make a Kid Cudi song, like what does that sound like?
Yeah.
So you gotta, I think, having that like depth, that knowledge of music in general goes so far if you're trying to be a producer in specifically in the sync space.
Hey, it's Mike, and I just wanted to jump in the middle of this episode to let you know that I have a secret other podcast. That's right, it's super secret. It's secret because we haven't been telling anyone about it, and then we realized we need to be talking about this more. I have an after hours podcast. That's right. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central, I'm going live on our YouTube page, and I'm talking a little bit more about the episode that we just released, because these podcasts come out on Wednesday, and I dive even deeper the process behind why we chose this topic, kind of the backstory, all the little details, all the extra things that I wish we could get into in the regular podcast, but honestly, with time, we don't always get a chance to do that. So I was like, we need to have an after hours podcast. This is where you can come. It's live. You can ask me questions. So remember, just go to youtube.com/songwriting for guitar. You're going to see where you can join our live. So remember, Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central, the After Hours podcast. All right, let's jump back into the episode. How do you navigate to coming from a live band perspective and then coming to the production? Because I always like try to describe someone, okay, how you play it live is not necessarily how you have to play it when you're recording, because like live is a moment, recording is something that's going to be used again and again.
Right.
How do you as a producer kind of like, again, I guess navigate those waters of like,
Yeah.
oh, it's just like, that's the live feel, but this is how it needs to be for recording.
Yeah, I feel like it's so much about serving the song. Like
Yeah.
when you're live, I've definitely seen bands play live where, you've got a guitar player, you got a guitarist who's like playing a part, and then you've got a bass player playing a part, and you've got the drummer doing the most,
Yeah.
as much as he can possibly do. And it's sort of chaotic, but in a live setting, it's like, oh, wow, look at all this energy on the stage. This is kind of fun. And you can kind of like accept that when it's live. Recording, I think you really have to be very careful about how you're serving the song and not having too many competing parts and just really pulling it back a bit, getting really tight. I think about the way that I track guitar parts now is like as tight and tidy as I can possibly make them. Um,
I'm
yeah, I
just
don't
like,
know. I
yep,
mean, like,
yep, yep, yep. I agree. It's just like, it has to be. But that just
yeah,
made me so like, when you were like, yeah, when you see it live, it is impressive. When you listen to it, it's like, this sounds like a jumbled mess.
right. It's like a cacophony of, I don't know. It just is, it's never good. Um, Like I struggle when I see that kind of stuff, particularly with young bands, because it's like, well, you guys are just all trying to play the coolest parts
Mm,
that you can play on top of each other. And that's not what good songwriting is about. It's maybe fun, but it's like you're not going to get far if that's
no.
what you're doing all the time. So, yeah.
But I love that you're looking for it to be fluid, to have that serve the song, to have lots of moments, lots of possible use for that. And I feel like for me in the beginning, I was better at that than the technical side of recording, because there was a whole bunch of shit that I was just like, I don't know what this does. Like, I'd hear, well, you just need to bust that. Hmm? What
Hmm.
is that? I don't know what
Right.
that means. And I'm
Right.
scared to hit the bust thing on Logic because I have no idea what it does. And it's like, where do I need to bust it? And why do I need to bust it? What is it going to do? I don't think it does
Right.
anything. Um,
Right.
how is that too? Like, starting to build that repertoire of, the technical side as
Yeah.
you're creating.
Well, like for me it was pretty like a natural evolution
Mm-hmm.
over a decade. Like I said, I was starting to make demos and stuff, and I had been in the studio enough times with this wonderful, wonderful engineer, Jim Stewart. So hi Jim, if you're listening. But I was in the studio enough times with him and really was like a sponge and wanted to learn what he was doing and tried to really pay attention. And so then when it came time to like tracking stuff on my own, it's like, oh, why can't I get it to sound like he did? Like, what do I have to do to get that delay to sound separate? What do I have to do to like, create space from this? There's too much reverb and my vocals washed out. Like, what can I do?
Yeah.
And so I think it was like a natural progression of like experience in a proper studio with being able to watch people who knew what they were doing and then trying to recreate that myself. And I spent probably a few years just like watching YouTubes and trying to gain knowledge that way. Um, and eventually I felt like there was a snowball effect of like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm making so many connections now. I finally understand how all these things work. And today like every week, I'm watching tutorials from different producers and taking in as much content as I can because I still feel, although I have paying gigs and clients and artists who want to work with me
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of stuff, I still don't feel like I'm, that great of a producer. I have so much further to go than where I'm at today. So it's like constant learning, like a growth mindset, like
Yeah.
to me, that has been everything. But the technical stuff, honestly, it's just like watching YouTube and saying, yeah, why do I need a bus? What does it do? Where does it, when I click on this, where does it even like send the new track? Like
Yeah.
trying to figure out all that. I really just watched and learned.
I love it. It's the same. Like, I think there's something you said of just watching somebody do their
Yeah.
thing and just be like, oh, that's interesting. They're going there. Okay. I would also say, like,
Right.
I'm not going to ask you any questions. I just want to watch, which was a total lie. Cause I'd always like be like, I got a question. Why are you doing? But just being there. Like we were talking about drums, and I remember there was a period where I was like, man, my drums sound so fake. Like they just
Yeah.
sound like MIDI drums. I'm like, well, number one, you're not separating them. Okay. Remember, like when you were in the studio, there were lots of mics everywhere too. Like they mic'd
Right.
under the drum, on top of the drum, over the drum, the side of the kit. So they're picking up all these different like so try to recreate like what was the room drum sound like? What was the bullet mic that's like super shitty that like distorts and then plant, and it's like, oh wait a minute, you're right. That's why I had those moments.
Right.
Because I do know I just have to be more intentional and like think about it as I put it together. But I also love how you mention, even though you get to a point where great things are happening, you never become complacent in that. And it's like, cool, it's time to up the learning. I feel like I always have to invest more in the education side, because if I don't, then I'm going to stay at a certain point, or my fear is always like, then just the slight, just
Right.
like regressing, if any.
Right. Yeah, yeah, the complacency is just, like, so boring to me. I'm
Yeah.
like, "Okay, whatever, like, move on." I wanna learn, I wanna grow, I
Mm-hmm.
wanna be better always. Um, yeah, you gotta put in that effort. I think it's interesting, like, talking about, the studio mics and being in a space, watching someone do their thing, and going back to what I was saying about like really understanding at a basic level how to play as many instruments as you can. Think about programming drums, and sometimes people will bring like a demo where they've programmed the drums and the hi-hats. There's like no velocity difference on the hi-hats or something, you know? So it's just like it's awful. And I think like, yeah, what drummer do you know that plays a hi-hat like that? No one. You know, you gotta like think
Perfectly.
about
Just-
it's like, how do you make this sound more human? You gotta like
Mhm.
you're doing it in a computer. So now you have all of these tools at your fingertips,
Yeah.
but you have to still make it sound human, you know? So it's tricky, but I think so much of it just comes from the observation and yeah, watching people that are excellent at their craft and trying to take what you can from them.
And I think the one thing that you did, which also helps, is just like that implementation you're watching and you just start doing, because you have two options. I think people also wait where they're like, I'm just going to accumulate more knowledge and give it 10 years. And that's when
Right.
I'll make my first move. And it's like, no, 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 no. You got to move now, but it's not going to be good. Oh, no, no, it
Right.
won't. You got to be okay with
Right.
it not being good.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it's gonna be trash for sure.
Yeah, but it's just being okay with that. And I guess maybe that's the
Right.
first level of uncomfortable. Or maybe the first level of uncomfortable, I don't know, it's like, for me, it's starting a band and singing terrible songs and just being in
Right.
front and being uncomfortable that they suck and nobody likes your band at first. Or it's just like only a small pool of people do, and that's as far as you get. And some people get disheartened by that, and others go like, well, okay, well, I'll start again. I'll do another one. I'll see what happens this time. And they
Mhm.
try. They just at least attempt to do it again, but try to do a better version.
Right. It feels like there's maybe some level of, like, healthy delusion, you know, where
Yeah.
you, like, don't know that you suck maybe or like, "Oh, I suck a little, but, like, maybe I'm not so bad." You know, like, some kind of delusion helps you move forward, I think.
You know, everybody talks about ego, and I think there's two sides. There's a healthy ego, and then there's
Yeah.
unhealthy. Unhealthy is like, I'm the rock best, and you're the, there's that side. And there's like, you know what? I can be really good at this. I think things are going to
Right.
work out. I mean, it's not necessarily, it might not be in the time frame that I want, and it may not always be the way I want, but I think I'm going to be okay. I think you kind of have to believe in some
Yeah.
sense that things are going to work out, that it will be worth it. And you just have to be okay with that.
Yeah. And I think it's like taking the wins and using those as fuel too, you
Mm,
know? It's like, if I hadn't received there were certain signs along the way that like, "Oh, maybe I'm on the right path." You know,
yeah.
I was booked for like a McDonald's commercial. I had like a really cool interaction with Jack Antonoff once, where he was like, "Wow, you guys are actually like a really tight local band. Like we almost never have local openers that are as tight as you guys are." He wanted to trade CDs, you know, and like it's those little
That's
moments
a pretty
where
fucking awesome. Those are several awesome moments. So did you open up for Fun early on?
it wasn't Fun actually, it was Steel Train. So
Oh,
his
that's
band
right. He
prior
was.
to Fun, yeah.
Oh,
I,
okay. Man,
yeah, I
that
think
was
they
a
were
hidden
on.
drive-through band. Steel
Yes,
Train. That was
Drive Through, yeah.
definitely Drive-Through Records. That's a hidden band right there.
Yeah, so Steel Train played the Grog Shop in Cleveland, and we were an opening act, and at the end and I knew them because I was, like, into that scene, like, Fearless, Drive Through, like, the Epitaph, all
Mm-hmm.
those labels I was, like, really into, and, so I definitely knew them, was a little bit starstruck, and Jack came up after the gig and, like I said, he was like, "Can we trade CDs?" Which now is, like, so laughable to me that this dude who's this mega producer ever wanted to just, like, exchange a CD, and our the one that I gave him was, like, a home studio, super shitty recording. I just think he got the bad end
But
of
it's
that deal.
that it's moments like that that do
Yeah,
have to power, because you have to. It's not always going to be front and center spotlight amazing. It, like, like how you want. It's just going to be these little tiny moments of like,
right,
oh, this is good. And if people are like, Jack Antonoff, who's that? And it's like, he just produces basically all of Taylor Swift, now Lana Del Rey, and is basically
right.
this Grammy Award winning producer. Then did the band Fun, has had numerous hit singles, just how it is, hangs out with comedian Mike Birbiglia, they're besties and they're doing all. But that to me is like, those are moments where you're like, okay, cool. You know what? I'm just going to remember this, especially when things are not necessarily, I wake up and they're sunny. They're like,
Right.
it's a day where I could hit the eject button and not create. But something tells me, no, I'm just going to put in the work anyway. I'm just going to show up because
Right.
I need to.
Yeah. Well, and for me, it was always like, well, maybe I do have something.
Yeah.
I always needed that reassurance that I wasn't just terrible at everything. And I was like, okay, well, if Jack liked what we did, like that's cool. Maybe I've got something there. And if, like I said about, someone hired me to be in a McDonald's commercial, that's cool. I must have like something that's appealing.
At that point,
like
you have to be like, I am doing something right,
right,
and I got to just
right.
keep on going.
And that's the key is you can't just give up because it's hard a lot of the time. You just have to keep going. If what you want is to be successful or like have like a career or even a side hustle, like I have a full-time job. So like if that's what you want, I think you got to use those moments and you need to, I don't know, just hold on.
Well, I think you do because
And
you described it. I think it is. You just have
yeah,
to, if you want this, then act like you want. Show up,
right,
do it, and
right,
and be okay with just you're gonna have to put in the work. Just accept that and just be
right,
like, this is how it is, and that's okay. You
right.
know, but I'm sure some people will be like, but it happened quickly for so and so. That's great. That's awesome. I think it's also coming from a place of gratitude when you see someone do something that's great and it works out for them, to be happy. I'm trying
Yeah,
to
right.
be happy and not like, that was a missed opportunity for me. But it's just like, that's fucking amazing. Like,
Yeah,
I love hearing when people do good shit. It's just fun to hear because it's like, what's always interesting, there's always a cool story. It's never just like, it happened overnight. It's just like, here's what happened, like this, and then this happened. It's like, oh, that's cool. And to
right.
me, then it's like, I look forward to not only them getting more moments like that, but then having a moment like that myself where I'll be like, you're going to not believe it. I was at this gas station when da da da. And like, it's a, weird story, but it happened. Those are
Yeah,
cool.
for sure.
Now, my question would be, if somebody was starting out in production right now, and let's say they're just starting out and everything seems daunting, like this entire process, they love it, but it seems daunting. What would be your best piece of, I guess, kind of encouragement?
Hmm. I would say start with with where you're at. Start where you're at now.
Yeah.
If what that means is like you play guitar and you sing and that's all you know how to do, well then get really good at making demos of you playing guitar and singing.
Mm.
Like track your parts, double track your guitar, like learn the sort of basics of how to make those two elements sound as good as they can. And
I
certainly, like I've been promoting YouTube, but like go to YouTube,
I
find those
love
videos.
all of, and you're right. It's just like, if you could just get a good recording of your guitar and vocal,
Right,
but just starting with where you're at, because people are always looking to, well, what should I do now? And it's like, well, what can you do right this very moment? Like, what's like step
right,
one you could do?
right.
That is
And then I think
fantastic.
though,
Yeah.
I think when you get good at that, like at least for me, there's a bit of like an obsession about recording, or like I do something and it sounds cool, and I'm like, oh, great, maybe I'll put bass on it now, and like you start to let your excitement take you to the next step and the next step and the next step. Um, then I think you do that for years
Mm-hmm.
and you build on it and just see where it takes you. But like you got to start with where you are and not have like unrealistic expectations that like suddenly you're going to be Jack Antonoff, for example, in 2 months of producing. That's not going to happen, but you can get there over a period of time, depending on how much work you put into it.
Oof. There, I like that. I like that. You're like, over a period of time, depending on how much work you, that little slide at the end. But I think, yeah, it's just starting where you are
Hmm.
and being okay with that. Like, what's the one thing you can do right now? Cool. You
Right.
can play guitar and you can sing. Start just doing lots of vocal, like demos of yourself, because they're going to be bad.
Right.
Because I feel like
Yeah.
there was a period of time too of getting used to hearing myself. Nothing was worse than like a dry vocal in the studio in a section where I totally fucked up and it was on loop and repeat. And it was like, I don't believe in hell, but if this was hell, this would be it right here. Just listening to that one vocal again and again. But then eventually it's almost like becoming immune to it and being like, oh yeah, that's totally wrong. Cool. Here's what I have to do to make it right.
Exactly.
Whew.
Yeah, like shedding the embarrassment of it. Like
Yeah.
we're human beings. We're not going to sing every take perfect. In fact, most takes I think are going to have a lot of mistakes. So like just go through and listen and be critical and fix the parts that you need to fix and then move on, you know?
Oh,
There was a great video. I want to say it was on like a Netflix show with David Letterman, maybe, but there's a video of Billie Eilish and maybe Phineas was there too, but showing him how many takes, like basically a comp. They were describing how you comp vocals, and they were like, "Oh yeah, this one took 34 takes or whatever it was," and he was so blown away by that. But it's like, yeah, that's how a lot of people do it. I mean, certainly there are probably one take wonders out there, but I don't think that that's the norm.
I saw that
so
video
yeah.
and it was great because it was just like he was just blown away. She was like, different take,
Right.
different take, different take. And he was like, what? That sounds like one. And it's like, yeah, that's the whole idea.
Right.
But oh my goodness, Steph, this was awesome. I feel like there's so much more we could get into it because I feel like we can go and do a half of mindset because we've barely covered we've covered story, but to me, like, you know, starting to build your journey too. It's like, it's a whole bunch of mindset and a whole bunch of building yourself up a lot.
Yeah.
But
there's so much. I feel like there could be therapists who exist solely to work with musicians, I think.
I think there are. That's what coaches are. That's what.
Yes, coaches. Yeah. You're right. You're right.
This is great. So if people want to follow you, where do they go?
Well, I'm primarily on the socials. I'm on Instagram at Steph Trivison Music. I've got StephTrivison.com, of course. Got an email list, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, Instagram's my main source. So you have the best chance of reaching me there. And then just stay tuned to your televisions because there might be a song on there that I worked on.
I love it. This is awesome, Steph.
Oh, and hey, before we go, I got to congratulate you. Your book's out and folks this will be later when you air it, but your book's out today.
Yeah.
So congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, it was fun. It was cool. That in itself was the doing of just like, I should write a book. Cool. Let's go do it. Let's just thank you. I'm so glad that we were able to like chat because I feel like now we were passing strangers in the Instagram space, but now it's just like, okay, we talked.
Yeah.
This was so good.
I'm stoked. I've been excited since you reached out. I'm so happy to meet. I feel like we're, I've looked at some of your stuff. Like I know you're a Butch Walker fan. He's like my favorite musician of all time.
It's my one hope in Nashville that we're gonna, just, I don't know, I pass by him in a Kroger, and I'm just like,
yeah, you should. Well, you should just. Well, you shouldn't stalk him, but you should try to increase your chances of meeting him. I think while you're there,
I would love that.
Yeah, but I feel like kindred. I don't know. I'm like I have obviously taken in a lot of your content. I know you're in your late 30s. I'm in my late 30s. You're from Pittsburgh. I'm from Cleveland. I feel like we have so many just like alignment things happening there. That I feel like I know you, but it's so great to finally actually get to talk.
Likewise, I feel like I know you too. And it's just like, hey, we actually talked. Like this was not on Instagram, but this was, and I'm sure this will be, I will have you back because I feel like we've just barely scratched the surface.
Yeah, man. Happy anytime. Let me know.
Awesome. Thanks for being on, Steph.
Thank you.
And that does it for this week's episode. Like always, it was edited and produced by Chris Fafalius. I'm Mike Meiers. I can't tell you how many times I have to record the word edited. It's hard to say. Try to say it naturally a few times. But anyway, thanks for listening.